Hello, everyone. I'm trying something different. I had an idea to record a new kind of video, basically, that I've never done before. This is my Substack blog, Soft Spoken Changes, and this is something I wrote about a month and a week ago, on the topic of YouTube video essays. Now, the reason why I'm choosing to do this again, or to go back to this topic, is because I was considering perhaps addressing, it's kind of interesting, the medium of choice, right? To, is it better to talk about the platform you're criticizing on said platform, or is it better to do that off platform? And I've noticed, for one thing, that when it comes to consuming content on YouTube, quite a lot of the content that I'm subscribing or whatever, consuming, watching, is basically in reaction to things from other mediums, right? Such as a somebody might say something on Twitter that starts or post something on Twitter that where some people use YouTube to record a whole video doing an analysis, a reaction, a commentary to something that's on Twitter. Or else there's a lot of YouTube videos. The basis of the commentary is basically certain viral trends on TikTok. Now, I choose not to use TikTok. I choose not to use Instagram. I choose not to use Twitter. I do use YouTube, and as such, there's a predominant. I because I have basically eliminated a lot of social media out of my life, and I have end up just spending more time watching long format YouTube videos, and I've have a certain criticism for the whole format of doing these video essays on YouTube. And part of that has to do with, I have to admit that I'm not entirely against them. It's sort of like a love-hate relationship. And I think, like anything, it's just like a format that can be done well or it can be done poorly. And there's a but I think that you have to sort of separate style from substance, right? And the part of the problem that I find, anyways, is that there is a basically there is the substance of what it is you are communicating, and then on top of that there is a lot of aesthetic, there's a lot of stylization, and also if you're drawing on things from Hollywood and movies, there's the opportunity to source video clips to use for your videos. But part of the problem about this has been that recently I have noticed that I don't know if they're getting more strict with this. I haven't been trying to do this, but certain channels that I follow have been reporting complaints about not being able to upload videos that source material from movies. But then I can obviously see that within the recent last year or two, there have been plenty of videos that maybe source material. And so it's really, maybe the question is, you may say that you're only allowed to do it if you, like, there's a certain arbitrary criteria that constitutes fair use, right? Where by a certain fair use standard, you should have the right to use all kinds of media if you are not just, like, the basic idea is that if you're not just pirating the movie and showing somebody the full movie, or like to take away the business from the people who are distributing it, then even if your take is not very good, or even if your messaging is something that somebody doesn't approve of, you should have every right to say what you want using the footage of the movie as much of it as you want. But it seems to be a kind of arbitrary or unfair level of censorship of those kinds of essays. So for one thing, it's created a kind of unfair playing field where whether or not you're allowed to use footage from whatever movie is entirely perhaps dependent on a undisclosed process of whether you merit the ability to do that or not. Like somebody's judging whether you get a pass or not, but by the way the law works, everybody should have the right to a fair use, and even if you're really just like have a shit take on it, you should still be able to do that. But however, despite this, and also, I mean, it is also the what constitutes a good take or a bad take or a good analysis or a bad analysis is entirely, it may not be easy enough to ascertain if your job is somebody who just gets to approve or deny whether or not certain YouTube videos are approved for upload or not, right? So there's something about this where there's that issue. There's another issue that I've been thinking about where is let's assume that the video is approved using a certain amount of footage from a movie or something, is that I find that there are certain movies that or maybe my favorites or whatever, that have highly stimulating, visually appealing aesthetics and stylization it took the people who made this stuff an enormous amount of work power to do it, because they were doing it especially we're thinking about things like Japanese anime. I'm thinking specifically, there's a video I saw recently that used the anime Akira footage from that, right? And then using the climax at the end of it where he mutates into a big blob that fills up a stadium. Like, it's like that. I was always just impressed at how extreme that scene was, but it was like the point of that scene was it came at the end of the movie, and that you had to sit for the whole movie and take that scene in the context of the whole plot of the story. And it's like, if you're just taking the most stimulating shit out of a movie and then putting that in your video, and then to be like, oh, like if you click on this link, you're getting, and then this is one thing that I realized about the whole format of doing people who do movie critiques and analysis, is that on some level, I do appreciate the format. Going back to stuff like, I'll give an example, is that Slavoj Žižek became popular by doing a number of movies like this, like The Pervert's Guide to Cinema, or that kind of stuff. There's like these Slavoj Žižek movies where he would recreate the set, where he would be like in the bedroom from The Exorcist, or in the like or the alleyway from They Live, or whatever, all these classic scenes with Žižek, right? And like he made a whole movie out of that. And I think that there is an argument to be made that style, like he basically is like, he did a big long video essay as a movie, as a popular critical theorist, and it's a totally valid format if that's the format you want to work in. But by doing it in an amateur way, where it's like you are basically just cannibalizing something that somebody else did, even if you're contributing your analysis to it, by making it this thing that's very like a lot of like highly edited. You take all the clips, all the really things that really pop about the movie, and then you edit them and splice them together so that they're really fast, and then you maybe put your own music on it or something. Like, there's something about that format which it's tempting to do, because anybody with a computer can just watch movies, record shit, and put it together in DaVinci Resolve, which is free. And it's like, computers are almost designed to be good at doing this, and it takes very little technical knowledge. Anyone could do it. I could spend my days just sitting here making these video essays, and yet, despite the fact that I do appreciate some of the creators that are working this style, I just choose not to, because of this whole thing where it's like taking stuff taking the most stimulating stuff and hyper condensing it into this really small package, right? And what I also notice is that there is another, even if you're not doing that with the visual stuff so much, there is this tendency to equate the value of what makes a good YouTube video with the amount of time and effort and hard work that you put into that. And I mean, like, in the sense of, like, instead of just doing a one take video, I'm going to take multiple video. I'm going to do multiple takes, and then I'm going to like condense it down so that maybe I have a certain flow in my creative process, right? Where you could say that like every day I'll record so much and so much, and then I'll have this one idea, and then I'll build on that the next day, and then I'll build on that, and then to the point where like you are the end viewer is watching a video that lasts like half an hour, but it's basically like a whole month worth of process condensed down into so it's like you're getting a whole the time frame of a whole creative process condensed down into like a fucking bullet that you fire at a person. And even if there are good ideas, I'm just again not criticizing the merit of the content, but that if you were saying, if you're, instead of criticizing the content of the argument or the idea or what with the message or what it is that's being communicated, if instead what you are judging is the merit of the hard work, like wow, this person worked for like a whole year to make one thing that's like 5 minutes, that that is just like a bullet getting fired through your skull of information, and you're like, whoa, I don't know what to think, you know. And it's like that is like, even if you were to like take whatever they're doing and make it more digestible, it's like the whole, even if the kernel of the idea has something valuable to it, it's created this certain style of online communication that is like, I'm basically the most I can do is just figure out other ways to do things, to offer an alternative that, you know, in the face of it, maybe this alternative is not even going to be very popular or a good idea, but it's at least, so I'm offering this as an alternative, is instead of, you know, maybe this is a certain infinite recurrence of my own introversion, the fact that I'm just going to advertise to you my own Substack blog, but these are some ideas that I've had since writing this one a month ago that I thought I would include before reading. I'll read to you now this thing that I wrote a month and a couple weeks ago, okay? Allow me to catch my breath. I'll just drink some water before I get into this. Okay, regarding YouTube video essays, a Substack post by one Dan Burkett on July 7th, 2025. As someone who consumes a lot of YouTube content, I am starting to notice a pattern in terms of the structural form of the popular video essay format. You could consider the highly edited video essay one of many popular formats of online video production, which could be contrasted with other approaches such as more boots on the ground, documentary style, or news journalist reporting. Perhaps a distant cousin would be the out for a stroll walk and talk vlogger, the slightly amateurist raw, unedited, long format bedroom vlog, or perhaps just recording actual university lectures and then putting them up as YouTube videos. So you notice there's certain characters here, the boots on the ground style. I'm thinking kind of like the Andrew Callahan style, Channel 5 or All Gas No Brakes, where you're like, you could be a person who has a camera crew, a portable microphone, you're going into the crowd and you're creating content, just kind of improvising live with what's going on. There's another guy who I watch sometimes, some Irish dude who does things like this as well, where he's kind of improving off of characters he finds out in the world. I tend to be more of a sedentary homebody individual, so I'm just like less gravitating to that just by default, and I also am not, it hasn't ever really struck me to do the walk and talk out in the city strolling style either. Like, that just does not, I mean, I could, I guess, but it's just not really what my, there is something about when you're doing that, you're playing off of the environment more than, you know, there's something that I don't think the environment is ever entirely neutral, so there could give you a different flavor in that process, but my personality, it tends to be as such that I would just do it this way, right? There's also the recording of actual university lectures, and this is how Jordan Peterson, for example, became popular, is that he was a university professor who would just record and put his stuff up on YouTube. There's quite a number of other university lecturers that you can find as well that maybe more have better reputation or respect or whatever. But he was just an example of what gets popular. Okay, so this approach of presenting a YouTube video as if you are giving a lecture has worked to launch many public intellectuals into worldwide superstardom, as he who shall not be named, which I accidentally did. But this also tends to work well because teachers and lecturers will often make use of presentation tools such as PowerPoint presentations. Speaking of which, maybe I can make use of the zoom in feature if you want to read along here. And so most popular video essays come off as if someone is trying to give a lecture or a presentation using PowerPoint, and at times implementing the use of video to try to borrow the affectation of a documentary filmmaker. It is also very common to make use of other people's writing as a reference. And this lends what you're doing an air of credibility, because instead of just yelling into the vacuum, you are now taking part in a broader conversation and including ideas from other people who have at least established themselves enough to get a publishing deal or some kind of recognition or reputation of credibility. So even if you... Sorry, this is perhaps something I need to edit here. So even if what you are doing is somewhat unrecognized or unsubstantial, you can use references to other material to piggyback onto the success of something which is more established and popular. So this is the basic idea, is that you have to understand what comes to creating valuable intellectual content or critical analysis, is that if you are just some schmuck writing shit on your own, what gives you any credibility of why anybody should take you seriously? If nobody knows who you are and you're not attached to a sort of well-respected institution, one strategy that to lend yourself an air of credibility is to make references to things which are already accepted, or even if what you're trying to do is to aim for a more kind of lowbrow just form of popularity. There's this basic kind of association system where by referencing something else that has already established itself, you kind of absorb that credibility, right? But if there's somebody, if I'm going to make a video all about somebody that's popular and successful, it shows that I must know something about what popularity and success means, because I'm devoted, even if I'm not like that myself, I devoted so much time and attention to paying attention to somebody else who has made it, right? And whereas if you are instead referencing things which are obscure or people don't know about, you're just going to languish in obscurity with those people. And it's also, I think that's the way the search engines use, right? Because like as soon as you reference something there's the viral media, that if you want to become popular, you just have to notice what everybody else is talking about, talk about the same thing, and then you catapult yourself into stardom. And this is what Jordan Peterson did by just piggybacking onto the trans controversy, right? He saw an opportunity to just piggyback onto a controversial thing going on and catapult him into success and stardom. And he already had the benefit of being having the air of expertise being a lecturer, right? So if you don't have the actual credentials, what you can do is you can try to mimic that kind of affectation in the way that you speak. And the best way to do this is just to listen to other people that are academics who have podcasts, and to listen to things like their cadence, their tone of voice. Especially important is to notice the difference of tone of voice in when they're speaking themselves versus what they sound like when they are reading something off the screen in a way similar to how I'm going to be doing right now, right? You can notice that there's a different cadence, a different tone of voice when you are assuming the affectation of the person who has established themselves in a place of superiority, a state of authority. And even if somebody doesn't understand the point of what you're trying to communicate, your ability to kind of rub into this sort of style of affectation, and also not just the style of presentation, like speaking, but if you're able to use something like the studying a text or giving a presentation to occupy the air of a teacher or have somebody has something to say, it lends yourself an air of credibility that you're somebody who should be taken seriously, at least by this basic immediate pattern recognition system, that if you can talk like that, then you're worth being paid attention to, right? So for example, by doing a book review or by basing your video essay on around ideas of somebody else's book as content creator, you're also adding value by creating cultural currency. In the sense, there could be all this shit that has inherent value, but people just don't know about it, right? So if you do another thing, if you rather than piggybacking onto things that's popular, if you find some obscure shit that nobody is into and you say, hey, this is actually cool, and you don't know about it because of this, that, and that reasons, then you create something that previously nobody wanted, nobody was interested in, and because you can make it seem like it's interesting, all of a sudden you have just created value out of thin air. When before you thought that value was something that had to be extracted from resources or the natural environment, like oil and gas and minerals, you can actually just create value like pulling it out of your ass by creating an analysis and exposing the rich complexity of all the things that are already there that we may take for granted, right? In an objective material sense, books are not just paper and ink, but the demand or value of any of this stuff demands on collective interest being invested into something. So essentially what you're doing becomes economically productive because it serves as a marketing strategy for a literary industry that otherwise may have trouble reaching its marketing demographic. So there is some opportunity here to be a content creator who adds value to things by highlighting the obscure and inapproachable. You could have started out by wanting to make a video essay to promote some kind of idea that is important to you, but eventually you just become some kind of marketing promoter or advertising influencer. So, but this is the problem, is that this is an opportunity for capitalism value creation. It basically, you may find the temptation of this. You may become distracted because originally you had substance behind your project. You had an idea, you had a message to communicate, you had something to say, but then you got distracted because of like the pretty lights and colors and all. You can just take their favorite shots of the movie and show them in a way that's very visually stimulating, and then you can make it like lots of music and stuff like this, and then you can also take things that people don't know about, and by bringing attention to them, you're now adding value to it, and now you are like a marketing genius, but you got so caught up in that you forgot what your fucking message was, and then you're starting to realize, wait a minute, am I just participating? So is this like in some way I am affirming something about this whole industry of culture that I like, that I participate in, that like gives me movies to watch and something to talk about and all this kind of stuff, like the Hegelian dialectic, I suppose. But at the same time, you're criticizing the cultural brainwashing that's in this stuff, right? Or are you just celebrating what you like about it? There could be different directions to go with this, right? But part of the problem is that if you take the Slavoj Žižek stuff that I mentioned earlier, there's a new problem that has opened up around what we would call woke or anti-woke politics, in the sense that there is people have a hard time dealing with criticism, and cultural criticism is sort of at the root of this sort of problem that Jordan Peterson rose to fame, right? Because Jordan Peterson had his panties in a twist about the cultural Marxist, right? The cultural Marxists, this whole idea came out of the Frankfurt School, and I actually, you know what? To be honest, my loyalties, this is one of the things that I've been trying to work out with this blog. If this is something that's interesting to you, maybe you want to check out some of my other blog posts. I wrote some posts about the Beatles, numerous posts about the Beatles because at some level I grew up. Well, actually, I even as a young child I could tell that there was something off about the Beatles because but there was it was kind of the Beatles had enough dynamism in their project to sort of redeem it, I thought, right? Because there was like the stuff that I thought that the teeny bopper rock and roll was fairly blatant, and in how stupid it was, right? And that as a child who grew up as a millennial in the 90s, just by default, it seemed like there was the culture had developed since the 60s to a point where the really naive where it's just a bunch of teeny boppers trying to do covers of like Little Richard songs to like so you can like present like that whole thing you can kind of see through it even at a young age, right? Or the kind of whole thing where like all you need is love, or like all that kind of stuff. It's like there's some I thought it was more interesting. I always was a sucker for the Magical Mystery Tour and the Revolver and the White Album, and then like that kind of era of the Beatles. And as such, the Beatles were criticized for being counter-revolutionary, right? Being counter-revolutionary and also being a culturally engineered mediocrity, right? The fact that you get these guys who didn't even really know how to play, like if you listen to interviews with John Lennon, he'll admit that he's not really that much of a guitar player. And he's a rhythm guitarist, right? That's what rock and roll is. You're rocking the riffs. You're not real. And then even George Harrison had to get fucking somebody else to what is the. Well, this is maybe a topic for another one, right? But the whole point was that the Beatles were. A lot of people point out that the Beatles were actually kind of overrated, to the point where it's like, but they're worshipped as if they're like idols or gods or something. And I'm of two minds about this. Where on one hand, I do agree that the Beatles do kind of suck, but that's also kind of what makes them great, right? What makes the appeal of the Beatles is that it's like their greatness is not so great that it's like it's not within your reach. Like it's like they're the Beatles exist to tease you that like that it's some kind of like it's within your reach to be John Lennon or Paul McCartney or George Harrison, right? And that was kind of, it's not that the product wasn't just the music, but rather to they're mirroring the subjectivity of the culture as it was going through tremendous changes and transformations, right? But in that, the Beatles were criticized as being counter-revolutionary with in the fact that they we don't have to get into that right now. But the thing is, it's like by talking about the Beatles, do I lose the point and just get lost becoming a marketing advertising guy who ends up making a product, like doing advertising work to sell Beatles records to a new generation that wouldn't otherwise be paying attention to them, right? And then I'm just a marketing advertising hype guy, and the importance of whether they're not but there's some people that are so attached though to liking the Beatles. This is the point, that people who have built their identities around liking a certain rock and roll band or something, and you're criticizing them in the name of wokeness or any other criticism, they won't take kindly to it, right? And there's also this kind of point when it comes to like rock and roll criticism. Who cares? Like, isn't it like if you can actually invest that kind of time and energy into criticizing your parents' favorite rock and roll band rather than all the other productive things that you could do for society, isn't that just showing you how unwoke you are? Because you're sitting on a lofty tower of privilege where you just listen to the same Beatles records over and over again and overanalyze it and probably come up with stale old criticisms that other people have already thought about, right? No, but the point is not the grappling with this problem of like do we need to have a cultural revolution where we have to burn the Beatles records, burn the Led Zeppelin records, burn any rock and roller basically is appropriated back culture, and we need emancipation for our brothers and sisters in the United States who have been oppressed basically, right? And that Paul McCartney is probably number one, the one who's exploited them the most, right? And that's if you have to destroy your Beatles albums because of that. That's just a small price to pay for justice, right? But some people are so offended by this that they become very, very defensive about it, and that this is basically the problem, right? What's my stake in this, right? My stake is that I honestly, it seems to me that there's more opportunity to be had in the cultural analysis of this problem than trying to actually be Paul McCartney or John Lennon, because at some point that kind of thing is like, nobody's going to be that kind of a rock star again. That's the whole point. The point is that they couldn't handle their own success. They had to stop touring because of how successful they got. No white boy starting a rock and roll band is ever going to reach that peak of Beatles mania again. It's done. It's a done fucking deal. The only thing we can do now is create products of our retrospective historical analysis and piggyback on that to try to boost ourselves into having some kind of a career as being somebody who has something to say, right? But the thing is, you're not actually allowed to use the intellectual property of the person that you are criticizing in your analysis, unless the people who own the intellectual property like what you have to say about it and agree with the message now, apparently, right? And that applies not just to the Beatles, but to anime, to movies, to TV shows, to maybe anything, right? And so what kind of opportunity do you have as a writer or a free somebody who has an original idea or something to express, right? You have to do it like, maybe instead of doing that, we should just do it like this and become and not be so dependent on some sort of outside reference point, right? The problem with this at some level, despite this phenomenon becoming a book influencer by reviewing books or talking about books you read, you can still approach the stuff from the level of the idea itself, regardless of the tendency for this to devolve into just being an advertisement to promote a book industry or the record industry or the movie industry or whatever. However, this lends itself to a different kind of problem. In most cases, if you start watching a YouTube video essay for the sake of the actual message the video is trying to communicate, not as an advertisement for some book, you might be thinking about reading next. You might run into the problem that in many cases, you probably know about this idea already, and what is appealing about this idea is not that you are actually learning anything new, but that something you already know about and agree with is being reinforced by someone who is presenting this information to you in a friendly, polite, country school teacher kind of way that can be accessible to the lowest common denominator. There is also this attitude that since many people may not have the time to read the book that is in the video, you're performing a kind of public service by taking some complicated idea that was previously obscured and hidden away in obscurity of the academic establishment. Now you are just presenting this in a way which the lowest common denominator of YouTube audience would be able to understand. Basically, what I'm saying here is that there is a kind of, I think there's an addictive problem about the format of video essays, because instead of just having the idea, right, the idea, the substance of the idea that you're trying to communicate, the message you're trying to express, it's mixed up with all this aesthetic stuff and the presentation or whatever. And what ends up happening is that you experience a kind of reinforcement bias, right? Where you're waiting for, you're familiar with this topic, and because you're familiar with it, you have interest in it, and so you have familiarity and interest in what's being discussed, and it looks like something that could be good, so you click on it, you start watching it, you're waiting for something to, and then it's all just stuff that you already know about, or from basically it's like the audience in mind is not you, but somebody who knows less about this than you do already. And so basically you're just watching along, trying to predict if there's any reason to be invested in this for watching other than just a few minutes, right? And then, so if you could, like, eventually you may just give up because you realize that not to say that isn't good stuff or that it's wrong or anything like that, but that it's only good to the extent that it's giving you something to agree with, but no new information, no new perspective, no new analysis, no new insight, and you just want, but then you want to like it anyways because I like this, because you like what the person says and you want it to be more popular, right? And if it doesn't seem like it has much popularity, if it like you feel like I should help promote this so that the things that I already agree with, I can see flourish and get more popularity in the algorithm or whatever, but then it's like, it doesn't actually, you're like, I'm also just liking something that isn't giving me anything new. It's just repeating something that I already agree with that isn't challenging me in any way. And is that what I want to see more of? Do I even like? It's kind of like, well, maybe would it be better for me to instead not say that I like those things, and then click the like button for things that are more challenging or give me more novel new ideas that I hadn't considered before. Because that, to me, that seems like it would be more valuable than just reaffirming all this stuff I already know or presenting it in a way for people that apparently haven't heard of it yet, right? Anyways, so there's also this attitude that since many people may not have the time to, you're also, the making complicated things more accessible by simplifying them down. The problem with that is that, you could just end up being overly reductive and overly simplistic and losing something when in the translation, right, to the audience. What generally ends up happening in this overall style of having a polite school teacher explain to you things that you already know or that you're already familiar with as if you didn't already know about them, but it's at least exciting enough or encouraging that somebody else agrees with you. You're not stuck alone in this isolated votive meeting, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, it's like it gives you, there's something about it that feels good because you're like, at least somebody understands, right? Even if it's an idea that you're familiar with and that you know, and you're like, it's not giving me anything new, it at least affirms that there's somebody else who thinks the same way I do and I'm not alone and I'm not isolated. But then it's sort of like, there's something about it where you're like, okay, I'm at least connected to other people in the world through the shared common ideas and perspectives and viewpoints. But then when that translates into your experience of the actual world that you inhabit and exist in, do you feel like the ideas that you hold connect you to other people, or do you feel like the ideas that you hold fragment you, polarize you, and separate you from other people in a way that's maybe even schizophrenic, in the way that like you spend all your time with all these ideas, all these thoughts, so trying to write stuff, and then, but in the fact you don't actually, your actually somatic experience in the world does not really feel like those ideas are connected. It feels like they're extremely disconnected from everything that's going on, except, so then it just creates a where you're in a void, and then there's people out there, but they're all very far away, and at least somebody thinks about you like the same way that you do, and you just have to you have to just click the like button on that as a small glimmer of hope in a world of darkness and ignorance, basically, right? And that just has to be good enough, right? What this has given rise to, I feel, is the dominance of a certain style of YouTube video essay, or it's like a PowerPoint presentation, video blog, lecture presentation, in which you present yourself with the air of a school teacher or a lecturer. You make reference to texts that are well respected by the establishment to give you an air of credibility, and then basically establish yourself on this chain of hierarchy where you're the middleman between some kind of institution of higher knowledge and credible learning and the lowest common denominator of whoever is out there in the chaotic masses that might be watching this material. The problem is that this becomes its own kind of slop content because there is something addictive about the structure of YouTube content, which is supposedly based around trying to show you more of what you like. Videos seem to get, this is probably bad punctuation, videos seem to get popular based on this dynamic of provoking people to hit the like button to say, yes, I agree with this, but essentially this is just reinforcing what you're already familiar with and reinforcing this idea that this is a hierarchical structure in which people with more authority than you get to determine what counts. And then you, as the audience, are infantilized, made to feel like a child in kindergarten, with the YouTube creators acting like these country school teachers who, by referencing the source material as some kind of higher authority, then get to dole out information to you in a simple way. This means that, and that means that, because this means that means that, we're telling you you're just a simple child, and we're telling you what everything means, because this is the whole point. Like, it creates the situation where, the world, the somatic, embodied world we live in seems somehow separate and disconnected from the digital world of information and communication. And there's this weird disjunction that happens where your embodied, lived-in experience feels very isolating, fragmentary, disconnected, and then your mental experience can be connected to ideas, to communication that's happening all over the world but isn't embodied, right? And there's something about this process where in that whole situation, what seems to dominate is the establishment of a certain hierarchical structure, right? Which is based on it has its roots in empire, right? It has its roots in imperialism, because the basic idea is that you have an imperial core, right? The core of the empire, which basically has a certain language and a certain system of mathematics and accounting, and then the empire rules over a number of different conquered states, or there could be alliances or whatever, but nevertheless you have the heart of the empire, and then out from that you have its colonies, and you have its states and stuff like that, and the people in the other states may have their own regional dialects, may have their own folk tales and stories and stuff like that, but they have to learn the official language of the empire, right, to speak to the imperial administrators, right, the managers of the empire. So you have to be fluent in the language of the empire to communicate with them, to basically negotiate how much they're taxed, what they owe, for their protection from the empire, all this kind of stuff. And so basically the whole system of education exists to create so that the populations, instead of having their own regional dialect, their own culture, they have to be educated enough so that when the empire comes and tells them you owe us this much and much money, they know, at least are competent enough with writing and math to be able to know what kind of debts they have to pay, or how much power the empire has over them, right? Because if they were just completely illiterate, they wouldn't be able to comply with that kind of a system, right? So you need this basic level of education to keep that structure in line. And so basically what we've inherited this whole mentality in our information structure, where any of this long distance information communication happens with the infrastructure of being like the imperial, you're the school teacher there to teach the poor impoverished children of the countryside what the rules are from the imperial core, and that and to do so in a friendly and gentle way possible, right? And this is basically this inherent structure repeats itself in our mode of information communication as a kind of imperialistic domination on the other, right? The totalitarian control to subject the populations to the will of the emperor, the dictator, who is claims to be, God's chosen representative of governments, here on earth, kind of thing, right? And the more that we fall away, even if we try to move towards a progressive democracy or liberal democracy, this imperialistic structure still underlies our whole language apparatus and our whole communication system, and even the whole pretense to what it means to be doing this work in the first place, right? And for this reason, I think it is. I I would identify, I suppose, as a woke deconstructionist, right? That I believe that we need to mercilessly uh, critique and tear apart and dismantle these sorts of regimes of imperialist domination at the most, even if it's at the most microscopic level, basically, right? And I've been very busy with my notebooks writing about this. Um, there's some underlying problem here that I was also implying, the problem about the addictive quality of it too, right? And I think one of the things I've also noticed, if you take this to another, I'm remembering very specifically the creator J Riggs said something about how fun or doing anything that's rewarding is basically like, if you're like, for example, one of the things that I do sometimes is I play racing games or car games, even though I don't drive. And one of the things about that is that it's there's maybe there's something that is gratifying to it, because there's some part of me that feels awkward about not driving, and that, at least if by giving myself the fantasy of being somebody that drives and owns a car and stuff like that, it relieves the awkwardness of having the identity of somebody who's not, who I'm not, to be honest, I'm just not really interested in it, right? But and it's also like the part of it too is that if I did drive, I mean, like, there's this attraction aversion thing about being able to race a fast car and drive really fast versus people not wanting you to do that and it being illegal. But then the video game provides the medium of a fantasy where you just get to drive recklessly and not have to worry about it, right? And so it's like it gives you this sort of safe container to do the thing that makes you feel uncomfortable, and then, like, you don't have to worry about doing it in real life, kind of thing, right? But in the same way, though, that having social connection with other people could be similar to, like, I don't really want to learn how to drive, and I would rather push for more public transit, and to not just public transit, but a sense of a community where we're not under sort of constant fascist threat of violence and intimidation, right? That we don't have to feel like a car is some safety bubble that protects us from some hostile environment, that we can actually just live in, like, you can just catch the bus and get on the train, and you don't have to feel like you're somehow fucking deficient. I'm a normal person, I just choose not to drive, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? But not only is it seen as something as like a failing on your part for not being able to drive, it's like that the world is like, it's ironic in a way, because cars themselves are dangerous. There's so many car crashes, and yet they're seen as to protect you from having contact with other human beings, right? Because other human beings, the people that might exist on walking down the street, or the people that exist on the subway, are these dangerous lunatics that might just pull out a knife and kill you, right? Because there are enough of them out there that are like that, right? So this has created an atmosphere. Now we have fascist, tough, strong men that are come to make us feel afraid of anybody who seems different from us, and live in a hyper-vigilant fear society where we need the police and the prison guards to keep us all safe and have security cameras on us at all times of day, right? And then in the midst of all this fear and paranoia, we live in this extremely isolated, extremely separated from other people. And then in the midst of all this, we have at least some opportunity to connect with other people who share our same ideas and share our same beliefs and stuff like that. But the fact that there's such distance from the media, like, the people aren't actually there. They're like millions of miles away, and you're just getting a little bit of like some pixels on a screen or something like that. And so it's addictive, because it's easy. It doesn't give you the friction of having to deal with an actual real person who might not like you, or you have to worry, like, you don't have to worry about, like, oh, did I remember to wear my deodorant, or do I smell bad? And you have all these, there's all this fear and insecurity that comes with having an actual human body. But if you are just operating on the level of pure ideas, you just send people messages at light speed back and forth, across the internet. Like, there's like this the internet itself is entirely a disembodied experience, and right. And so, like, there's this weird thing that happens where there's the you can become addicted to that because it feels good to at least have, oh, somebody else, like, I feel so lonely and isolated in my life, but somebody else gets it, somebody else thinks the way I do. But I also, in this way that it just is, it gives you like this cheap sugar hit of connection to some, that it's through this parasocial matrix that also makes it inherently both dissatisfying because it's not embodied and it doesn't solve the problem of feeling disembodied, but then it's also satisfying because it's also easier, because then you don't have to, you can just, like, you could just be like, well, I'm connecting with people all over the world and I don't have to worry about, taking care of my body at all. I can just completely so then out of this whole situation, we have developed this new society that is increasingly moralizes health, or the wellness warriors, right? Because of this situation, there's now incredibly this whole market economy that's like Olivia Newton-John 2.0 or 3.0 even, right? Of like how to keep yourself healthy and like your content that you put online always has to just be laden with all this fucking self-care regime bullshit. Then it's like hold on, wait a minute, it's like the Starbucks thing where you're selling somebody, like, you're selling the product that is like has the but you're like, don't worry, we've added this this is the Slavoj Žižek criticism, right? You're selling this product that is like junk food because it gives you something of what you're looking for, but it's like a cheap calorie because you just like, you're like, wow, I just get to affirm this thing that I agree with, that I believe in, and I don't have to deal with any of the friction of dealing with other human beings. But then it also doesn't solve the problem of me being lonely and fragmented and isolated and frustrated with this social situation. But at least I get addicted to having the constant drip, like the morphine drip of like, oh, there's people out there who agree with me, and there are other people in the world, I'm not alone, right? And then it's like, you know what I'm trying to say? And then what they do is then they'll put on all this stuff like, oh, here are some healthcare tips, or here I'll in our network of, we can have life coaches that'll help you switch to a healthier life. And it's like, no, like, why, like, instead of living in a totally isolated, fragmented world where like you are making a business offering me some stupid cheap shot of like, you know what I'm trying to say? Like, you're offering me this very quick hit of like, wow, of a connection, but it's a fake connection, and it inherently breeds resentment because it's like you're getting like junk food that is sort of like gives you calorie but doesn't give you the nutrition of like the whole. It's like the whole foods, like, you want to have embody, you want your mental shit embodied with your actual real life. You know what I'm trying to say? And it's like this creates this whole reductive approach where everything just becomes about being grounded, or you have this whole industry of people on computer screens telling you tips about how to be grounded. Why don't you just fucking not talk to people on computer screens in the first place? Then you don't have to fucking deal with it, okay? Why don't we just fucking just not, all you fucking, like, join my fucking webinar, why don't we just fucking not? Why don't we just not do this, right? Okay? So, what if, instead of being stuck in this mode of taking some complicated thing and then breaking it down to make it more simple and accessible to the masses, like sugar, right? Like, it's like sugar, you can have raw sugar or you can have refined sugar, right? Raw, like, Like high fructose corn syrup is it's processed things which were more complicated, that needed more time and energy to digest and break down. You are essentially making a cheap sugar product to sell to the masses, and the more you're laying loading it in with fancy music and stimulating visuals, the more you're just making a cheap, addictive sugar hit, rather than providing anything with what would actually help to make things better. And then you're actually also just acting as advertising for more of this fucking bullshit culture industry, okay? And if you work in that industry, you have a conflict of interest, because you have a conflict of if you're also, like, if you are somebody who works in a bookstore, you have the imperative to the stuff that your bookstore sells to make it so that people want to buy the stuff that you're selling so you can stay in business, right? So that you're not able to do a very clear criticism if your own profits are going to be impacted by if you're biting the hand that feeds you, right? So what if, instead of being stuck in this mode of making it more simple, you do the inverse and you took things that seemed relatively simple and then complicated them, or revealed that lurking beneath the surface of what seems fairly simple and easy to understand was a hidden complexity? Or instead of just continually reinforcing what you already agree with or already know, there was contact with some kind of idea that was actually new. Another one of these trends is the trend of categorizing things, sorting things into tiers, quadrant systems, mapping stuff out, categorizing it. But what about ideas that evade categorization? Instead of reinforcing or appealing to some pre-existing category or tier hierarchy, what about the appeal of the truly novel? Well, the problem about this whole system is that we become addicted to the confirmation bias of people who, I'm connected because somebody else thinks the same way I do, that has the same categorization system. Wow, you categorize that like that? I do too. Wow, somebody that's just like me. Then it creates this thing where the only thing that's good is what confirms what we already know, and we close our mind to a truly novel and innovative idea, okay? And it creates a system where you think that the only way that you can appeal to anybody is just to repeat some formula that already works, or that the only time anybody is going to approve of anything is that if you're just repeating some, you're just displaying that you agree with the same category system that they agree with. And there's no other game in town. This has been on my mind because I have been considering the problem with online media, that obviously when it comes to online video, despite some of the basic restrictions, you have a tremendous amount of creative freedom to do what you want, and yet there's a tendency for everything to be reduced to the same boring format where you feel like a child sitting in a classroom with some country school teacher telling you this is this, that is that, and this is some book some person wrote who is so much more respected and has more authority, and I am here doing the good service of being the middleman. And if you agree with this, it reinforces the whole situation, and you gain the subjectivity of being a happy, good, obedient student who will then go on to repeat everything in the same style, only instead of an overhead projector, you use an iPad and our computer, and this is our innovation, this is our progress. Just to keep this whole hierarchical, basically having the state to educate you about how much you're fucked and how much any of your ideas don't count, because you basically have to listen to what your superiors tell you to do, and your inability to do that reaffirms that you need to be treated like an infantile child, right? And then from that, you are just in this infantile child subjectivity. It's the best you can do is have like some school teacher explain to you all the things that you already know, and then your best chance of getting your idea getting across is not anything that you do yourself, but to just try to boost other people who are more, because the country school teacher is going to be a more palatable format for success than whatever the fuck it is you're trying to do. And by that I mean probably what I'm doing right now. But thanks for watching anyways. Please, if you haven't guessed, part of the reason why this is called Soft Spoken Changes is because if I were to communicate the things that I was writing about in this vlog I would have a tendency to raise my voice, right? And this is the sense that I would either dare to raise my voice, dare to speak loudly in the first place, has created a lot of problems for me and been diagnosed as a sign of illness, right? So I have my disability is that I tend to become affected by a certain emotional irritability, and I tend to raise my voice when I'm upset. And a workaround for this has been to write, is because it's quiet, right? And I also have to say that I don't know if it comes across in the recording, but it sounds like my neighbor is doing some kind of pressure washing. So I'm also raising my voice because I'm competing with noise in the environment. But I think this is also something that's not unique, that a lot of us have to deal with, that increasingly our places of habitation are more and more loud and more surrounded by various kinds of noise pollution that may just aggravate some of these underlying issues. But thanks if you watched this to the end. Thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting if you're interested in more, please subscribe to my Substack, and please subscribe to this channel. Thanks for watching.